The thunder rolled over the prairie like a slow footfall. Rain slanted so hard it erased the horizon, and Ethan McKay, richest man for 50 dusty miles, watched a lone shape at his eastern fence. At first he thought a stray tarp, then a woman's shoulders bent against the wind, hammer rising and falling with quiet determination. The sight of someone mending with a storm would break struck him with the odd, unfamiliar ache of being seen. She worked as if each nail sealed more than wood, each strike a defiance. When Ethan stepped off his porch, boots sinking into churned earth, the small sound of a hammer kept him rooted. She looked up. Rain had darkened her hair to black ribbons against her face. Her clothes were patched, her fingers roughened by labor. Something in her eyes, a tired bravado wrapped around a steady hope, made him say what he'd never planned to say. "Come in. Get warm," he offered. The word surprised them both. She hesitated, pride like a thin armor, then accepted the coffee he set in her hands. She called herself Clara Elms, and her story came in pieces. A washing job that turned to nothing when the boss burned the ledger, a roof that wasn't hers anymore, nights under porches and mornings bargaining for firewood. She skirted the word homeless until finally she said it plain, as if naming it might make it truer and thus easier to bear. Ethan felt the ledger in his pocket grow heavier, then less important. He'd built his life on contracts and cattle brands, on fences meant to keep the world at a measured distance. Yet watching Clara cradle a tin cup as if it were treasure, he felt something like shame for that distance. He offered her a room for one night. No charity in the loud, public sense, only a roof while the storm lasted. She refused to be bought, but accepted the shelter, not out of need alone, but because even the stubborn have limits. She left before breakfast with a folded note for the fence. "Thank you, Clara." In weeks after, Ethan began to notice a shadow mending boards at dawn, a woman moving through his fields with a basket and a calm, efficient gait. Gossip in town called her many things. None of them fit. She wouldn't be pinned as a charity case or a kept woman. She mended fences, fed horses, and when a blight came through a field, she worked with the hired hands shoulder to shoulder. But wealth breeds enemies. A rival claimed an easement that would cut through Ethan's irrigation ditch. Forged papers turned up in a saloon ledger. Suddenly the fence Clara had fixed in the rain was the hinge of a feud that could swallow more than crops. Ethan found himself pulled between the safety of his ledgers and the dangerous pull of a woman who refused to be rescued. The first hook of their story is simple and human. A rich rancher who thought money could buy distance, and a woman who'd been homeless until the storm offered her a porch. When law and greed come circling, both must choose: fence up and guard their solitude, or risk everything to let someone in. Ending line: "It's easy for me to copy the text and make voices." 6 weeks passed, and trouble rode in on a dust cloud before anyone in town had the sense to name it. Ethan first heard it from a ranch hand panting up the porch steps. A rival, Wes Harland, had appeared at the county office with papers claiming a right to carve a water easement straight through Ethan's irrigation ditch. On paper, it looked official. Too official. Printed, stamped, and signed with a mark Ethan's father used to make. Yet wrong in a way only memory could catch. Clara noticed it too. She held the document in her work-worn hands, turning it over as if its lies left a scent. "This signature ain't real," she said softly. "I seen it before. A surveyor with a limp used to forge things like this for land barons. Man owed me wages for fence repair. Never paid." Her voice held no bitterness, only the steady clarity of someone who'd lived too close to deceit to mistake it now. Ethan surprised himself by asking her to ride with him to the county seat. The journey was long, the road dusty, but Clara's presence steadied him in a way he didn't fully understand. She pointed out landmarks, old homesteads lost to time, places where land changed hands too fast and too clean. "Things don't vanish without someone sweeping," she muttered. "And Harlan's broom ain't small." The courthouse was loud, hot, and impatient. The sheriff tried to keep order, but Harlan strutted in with a grin wide as a cattle gate. He claimed the ditch had been drawn wrong 20 years ago. He claimed Ethan's father had agreed to a boundary shift. He waved the forged paper like gospel. Clara stepped forward. She didn't testify with fire. She did it with calm facts. She described the surveyor she'd once worked for, his limp, his crooked wrist, the way he'd always pressed too hard on the lower loops of letters. Murmurs rose. Even the judge leaned in. A widow in the back row stood up, trembling, and added that the same man forged her husband's cattle rights years ago. Suddenly, Harlan's neat story came apart at the seams. The judge delayed the ruling, uneasy. "Too much here smells of trouble," he muttered. Harlan's smile soured. When he passed Ethan on the steps outside, he dropped something onto the dirt. 3 nails strung on a leather thong. Clara bent to pick it up, eyes narrowing. "A warning," she said, "for men who prefer fences broken, not built." That night back at the ranch, Ethan found 2 fence posts sawed halfway through. Clara gathered the hands, organizing watches, assigning shifts with a confidence that surprised even her. "Storms don't always come from the sky," she told them. "Sometimes they come with handwriting." Ethan watched her in the lantern light, her hair pulled back, her voice steady as she guided rough, tired men as if she'd done it all her life. The more she stood her ground, the more Harlan seemed to circle, like a wolf testing weak boards. The conflict grew quiet and sharp. Dead cattle on a neighboring ranch. Footprints leading nowhere. A deputy with bruises he refused to explain. The air thickened with doubt. And then, as autumn winds sharpened, Clara found something buried beneath a fence plank. A scrap of fabric she recognized instantly, torn from the coat of the surveyor who'd once cheated her. The same man who'd disappeared years ago without paying his debts. "He's alive," she whispered, "and he's working for Harlan." The truth wasn't just forged, it was writing closer. Ending line, "It's easy for me to copy the text and make voices." Winter came early, sharp as a blade, cutting across the plains before anyone had their coats patched or their hay stacked right. The sky turned a flat, heavy gray, and within hours the ranch was swallowed in a white curtain. Ethan and Clara were finishing the last of the feed rounds when the storm snapped hard, sending ice pellets against their cheeks like thrown grit. "The headworks," Clara shouted over the wind. "If the ditch freezes wrong, it'll burst." It was the kind of risk every rancher dreaded. Without irrigation, spring planting would be a graveyard. They saddled up anyway, leaning into the wind as if riding through a world half erased. Snow stung, fences vanished into white, and the horses fought each step. When they reached the ditch, the wood groaned under the pressure of ice forming too fast. "We need to break it," Ethan said, eyes narrowing. They worked in silence, striking ice, clearing channels, their breaths white and ragged. Clara slipped once, and Ethan caught her by the arm. Just a brief touch, but it sparked something warm in the cold, something neither dared name. They made it back to the barn past midnight, soaked through and shaking. But the real blow waited in the shadows. Ethan's mare, Sweet Belle, staggered and collapsed before reaching her stall. Foam bubbled at her lips. Clara fell to her knees beside her, pressing a hand to the trembling flank. "This ain't cold," she said quickly. "This is poison. Arsenic." Ethan froze. Someone had slipped into his barn during the storm. Someone had wanted this to look like winter's cruelty, not sabotage. Rage rose in him like fire under ice. But Clara's voice cut through it. "There's more," she whispered, pulling a folded paper from the mare's blanket, an envelope sealed with a crude wax stamp, addressed not to Ethan, but to his father. Ethan broke it open with numb fingers. Inside was a map of the ranch marked with old boundaries, numbers scribbled in margins, and a note in the same cramped handwriting as the forged easement. "Debts unpaid will always rise from the soil." Ethan swore under his breath. His father's old gambling debts, the rumors he'd ignored, the whispered deals that had built the ranch in ways Ethan never examined closely. Harlan wasn't just forging signatures. He was digging into bones best left buried. "Someone wants you frightened," Clara said, and cornered. "They're doing the same to you," Ethan replied, lifting another paper that fell from the envelope. It wasn't addressed to him. It was addressed to Clara. Her face went pale. She knew the handwriting before she read it. "It's from him," she whispered. "The surveyor. The man who cheated me. The one who vanished." The letter was short, written in a slanted, desperate script. "I didn't forget. I know what you saw. Harlan owns my debts. He owns me. Don't come looking. You won't like what you find." Clara folded the page with shaking hands. For the first time since Ethan had met her, she looked afraid, not of the threat, but of the past rising like a ghost in the snow. The storm raged outside, beating against the walls. Inside, the truth settled heavier than the drifts piling at the door. "Ethan," she said quietly, "this ain't just about land anymore." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. They both knew the fight had shifted from a dispute over boundaries to a battle waged in shadows. And as the lamps flickered in the wind, Clara whispered the words that would carry them into deeper danger. "If he's alive and afraid, it means Harlan's building something far worse than forged claims." The storm eased by morning, but the air carried a tension heavier than snow. Ethan barely slept. The poison mare, the forged letters, the surveyor's warning. They circled him like wolves too patient to be seen. Clara moved through the kitchen with a quiet speed, packing supplies, checking saddles, keeping her hands busy because her mind was racing far ahead. Trouble arrived before sunrise. A rider galloped to the porch, tossed a folded paper at the door, and sped off without a word. Ethan snatched the note, eyes narrowing as he read the uneven scrawl. "Give up the irrigation rights and sign the boundary deed, or the woman leaves this valley in a wagon bound for the Western workhouse. You have 3 days." Clara read it once, her jaw tightening. "They won't get that far," she said, voice trembling with anger more than fear. "I won't be run from this place." Ethan paced, the floorboards creaking under each step. "This isn't a threat, Clara. It's a trap. If they take you, then don't let them," she cut in. "We face this the same way we've faced everything else. Together." But the noose tightened fast. By noon, rumors spread through town. A bribed deputy claimed he had orders to arrest Ethan for land fraud, charges invented on Harlan's dime. The judge, a showman who loved attention more than truth, agreed to mediate a settlement. That alone meant danger. "He's planning something public," Clara muttered as they rode toward town. "Harlan wants a stage, a crowd." She wasn't wrong. The town square buzzed with tension as the judge called the hearing. Harlan stood smugly beside his men, guns displayed openly. Ethan stepped forward, shoulders squared. Clara stood beside him, refusing to hide. Harlan laid out his terms with theatrical flair. Ethan would sign over water rights, grant access to half the grazing fields, and, worst of all, agree to a marriage contract with Harlan's sister, a union meant to legitimize the land grab. In return, Clara would be left unharmed. The crowd murmured, scandal and fear weaving together. Ethan's face drained of color. "You think I'd sign my life away to you?" he growled. "Not your life," Harlan replied with a grin. "Just your land. And your future." Clara stepped forward then, voice cutting through the cold air. "This isn't about marriage or land. This is about a man afraid of losing power he never earned." Harlan's smile faltered. "You talk too much," he muttered. "Then listen," Clara said. "You won't cage me, and you won't blackmail him." She'd already made a plan, one born from harsh years on the road, from learning how to slip out of traps set by men who underestimated her. She met secretly with Lakota neighbors at dawn, trading information for safe passage, for eyes in the hills, for old paths invisible to outsiders. She'd even left a decoy bundle at the well, something that looked like a woman's belongings but held nothing but rocks wrapped in cloth. Harlan's men grabbed the wrong target that night. While they chased shadows, Clara slipped into the abandoned barn where the surveyor had last been seen. She found him weak, trembling, terrified. He confessed everything. Harlan forced him to forge deeds, to poison livestock, to plant letters. And worse, Harlan planned to seize not just Ethan's ranch, but the whole valley. Clara returned at dawn with the confession written and signed. When Ethan saw her, relief crashed through him so hard he nearly stumbled. "They didn't take you," he breathed. "They never had me," she answered. "But now we have him. Just as she handed Ethan the confession, a sound broke the quiet. Horses approaching, fast. Harlan was coming. And this time, he wasn't bringing threats. He was bringing a gun. The sun had barely risen when Harlan rode in with 6 men, their coats flapping like wings of hungry crows. The cold morning light glinted off metal, rifles held loose, confident, meant to scare more than kill. The ranch yard froze, as if winter itself paused to watch the standoff. Ethan stepped forward before Clara could stop him, his hands open, jaw set. "Harlan," he said, voice steady, "this ends today." Harlan dismounted slowly, boots sinking into frozen mud. "You're right," he said. "It ends with you handing me what should have been mine years ago." Clara stood beside Ethan, shoulders squared. She held the signed confession tucked inside her coat, a weapon more powerful than any gun. Harlan's eyes darted to her, narrowing with a flicker of fear. He knew she had found something he couldn't bury. Ethan spoke first. "Your surveyor confessed. Every forgery, every sabotage, every letter. He wrote his name on it." For a moment, Harlan's mask slipped. A crack, a heartbeat of panic. Then he laughed, short and sharp. "Paper burns. But bullets? Bullets settle things cleaner." He drew his pistol. Ethan didn't move, not because he wasn't afraid, but because the valley was watching. Ranch hands, townsfolk, even riders from the Lakota encampment on the ridge. Harlan wasn't facing a lone rancher anymore. He was facing everyone he'd tried to bully into silence. Clara stepped forward first. Her voice was clear, cutting the cold air like a blade. "You shoot him," she said softly, "and every witness here will swear against you. The judge won't take your gold when the whole valley's turned." Harlan hesitated, fingers twitching on the trigger. And then Ethan held up the ledger he'd taken from Harlan's hidden safe the night before. The book that revealed years of fraud, land theft, and illegal water diversions. Every page was a nail in the coffin of Harlan's empire. "This will bury you," Ethan said. Harlan lunged, desperate, firing a wild shot that sparked off a metal pump behind Ethan. Ranch hands dove for cover. Horses reared. Clara didn't flinch. She moved faster than anyone expected, grabbing the ledger and sprinting toward the porch. Harlan chased her, straight into the path of the sheriff, who'd arrived unseen with half the town trailing him. "Drop the gun, Harlan," the sheriff barked. The standoff cracked. Harlan froze. Then, seeing no escape, he dropped the pistol into the dirt with a dull thud. Within minutes, he was in irons and cursing every name in the valley. The sheriff turned to Ethan. "You gonna press charges?" Ethan exchanged a glance with Clara. "I'm gonna make things right," he said quietly. In the days that followed, the ledger exposed everything. The valley rallied behind Ethan, not because he was rich, but because he chose fairness over pride. He offered restitution to families harmed by Harlan's schemes and hired workers instead of chasing them off with contracts. Clara, once homeless and hunted, became something far more powerful, a force of change. She reclaimed her dignity and her future, eventually taking charge of the small post station, turning it into a refuge for traveling women who needed safety and a fresh start. Ethan asked her to stay, not as someone to save, but as someone who had saved him too. They built something slow and honest, planting an apple, sapling by the fence she'd repaired the night they met. Every spring it bloomed a little fuller, white petals drifting over the land like a promise kept. The valley healed. The ranch flourished. And the story of the rich rancher and the woman fixing his fence in the rain became one of those tales people whispered with awe, the kind that reminded them even the harshest land can grow something beautiful when hearts choose courage over fear.